Hi, my name is Chasta Musenda, and I want to thank you for listening to today's message. I hope this message challenges you to know Christ, experience community, and influence culture.
Good to be here. Good to be back at Seven City Church. We we took a break while the church went through the tribulation in 2020 from coming here with all the COVID and everything else that happened. But we were here right before COVID, I think 2019, and it's great to be back. My wife Lori would have been here this morning, but she is with her mom. Her mom is 85 years old and suffering some health issues right now in the hospital. So Lori stayed home to be with her, but she sends her love. And Lori and I, anyone newly married here? Anyone newly married, like 1 year, maybe 1 year, 2 years? Anyone about to get married, thinking about it? All right, got a few, all right. Yeah, Lori and I, we're celebrating 10 years. We have 3 boys, one daughter, all in their 30s. And So I always give a tip to those that want to know, how to create and make a great marriage. So our vows included this, that I would make all the major decisions in our marriage, and then she would make all the minor decisions in our marriage, and it's worked out wonderfully. So far, we haven't had a major decision in 10 years, according to her. So, yeah, good tip there. All right. So you may ask what I do. I'll share a little bit of my story this morning, but for about the last 7-8 years, Lori and I have been helping men and women navigate out of infidelity and brokenness in marriages. I work specifically in counseling and coaching men out of pornography, out of sexual addiction. If you're not sure what sexual addiction is, basically sexual addiction in a nutshell is just somebody that is engaging in unwanted sexual behavior and feels like they can't stop. So unwanted, unhealthy, illicit, whatever you want to call it, destructive sexual behavior, and feels incapable of stopping that. So we're not talking about sexuality in marriage and all of that. We believe in that, yes. So, but we're talking about sexuality that can destroy us. And of course, it is in our culture. It is everywhere with both men and women. We just my focus specifically is men. So I'm going to share a little bit of my story this morning, and in keeping with our series, I've titled my message this morning. Maybe you've heard someone say this. The simple title is, "Who do you think you are?" You ever had someone say, "Who do you think you are?" But I'm going to say it in a different way. Who do you think you are? So we're going to talk about how our identity impacts and influences our sexuality and our behavior in that way. So I'm going to read a text. I want you to follow it on the screen. It's a beautiful text. Jesus quoted this actually when he proclaimed his mission in the synagogue. I think it's in Luke chapter 4, and this is how it goes. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," Isaiah prophesies, "because the Lord has anointed me to bring the gospel," or the good news, "to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to those that are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, and they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified." Lord, thank you for your word. Let the word of the Lord speak to us today. God, I pray that you would strengthen us, encourage us, empower us to live for King Jesus. And we thank you for it. Amen. I'm going to focus this morning on that verse, part of that verse where it says he gives beauty for ashes. Beauty for ashes. And so I'll begin with a story. It was about 2 years ago. I'm about to go to sleep. It's about 11 o'clock. Lori and I usually, as our custom is, we'll go to bed together around 8:39. We'll watch a show together. I get to watch my show about once a week, and then I watch her show 6 times a week. And so, anyways, we watch a show, we talk, we have a little bit of a laugh, and evening conversation. And she will usually, near the end of the show, like at about 10:30 or so, 10:30, she'll drift off to sleep. She always goes to sleep first. So whenever that happens, I'll hit power and I'll go to sleep after she is. And so I lie my head on my pillow that night, and as I'm lying my head sideways on my pillow, I'm looking at the window outside of our bedroom. And we're on the first floor, and as I look out, there's just a little bit of a crack in the blinds where I can see out into the yard, and I'm telling you the truth, I thought I saw a fire. And I'm looking, and I'm like, is that flames out in our yard at like 11:30 at night? And I'm kind of in, this dazed, almost asleep, and I don't know if it is or not. And so I start rationalizing and thinking about the fact there might be a fire in my backyard, and my brain goes like this. It goes, well, maybe it's not. Maybe my neighbor Josh is barbecuing at 11:30. Maybe I'm just seeing things. And then I look over at Lori, and I, you have to know Lori. The best way to describe Lori when it comes to things like this is she don't play. Like if she woke up in the morning and there was a fire and I didn't do anything about it, it'd be game over. Like it'd be all over. So I thought I better get up. Now, I am the kind of guy that gets things done, just not right away. So I overcame that procrastination, got up, walk out the back door onto the huge wood porch we have in our backyard, and lo and behold, there is a fire. And I cannot even understand why. I don't know where it came from, but it has come through our back fence, burning half of our fence down. It's going down the fence line, and then over on the left side, it's coming on our, at that time, really dead grass towards a wood patio. And it is so wide and so big, I don't know how to get it out. I mean, it was so high, I wasn't going to stomp it out. I didn't have any quick access to water. The fire department is at least 20 minutes from our house, which is out in the country, and I don't know what to do. So I did what any man would do. I got my iPhone out and I took a quick picture. I think we have that first picture. Yeah, that may or may not have been the picture. That may be another one that I found, because I may have lost the first picture, but it was pretty close to that. Big fire coming my direction, and I am freaking out. Fear is all over me. And so the only thing I know is I got to go to the water faucet and get a hose. So I run over, put a hose on. The water faucet's on the other side of the house. Finally get that over. It's not long enough. Get a second hose, attach it to that. It's still not long enough. Finally get a third hose, and it finally gets over where I can begin to squirt out this water. So I'm just spraying down this fire. It took me 20 minutes to get all the flames out, and I mean, it felt so good when I was done. I'd become what I've always wanted to be all the way through my life. I'd become a first responder. It felt so good. Any firemen in the house this morning? Any policemen in the house? No? All right, well, not a lot of hope for this crowd. We got no help at all. All right, any nurses? All right, we got some nurses. Oh, there we go. All right, we're good. So I go to bed. The fire's out. I don't even try to figure out what happened. I'm tired, done a lot of work. So I go to bed. I get up in the morning. I tell Lori. We go out. We look at this lawn, and so there's a picture of the lawn. So it wasn't that big. I mean, it was pretty big, but you had to be there at night. It looked a lot bigger at night at 11, but you can yeah, you could see the trail kind of going back down the fence line there, and that trail goes back to a big wood fence, and it did actually burn through this big wood fence. So I kind of follow that trail over, and I go to the fence, and I realize that where it started, there was a bunch of metal that had been burnt to a crisp where it began, and there was an extension cord going back to my neighbor's house, Josh. So I called Josh, and he comes over, and we look. When he gets there, he just looks at this and goes, "Oh, no." He said, "Blaine, Jessica, my wife, bought a bunch of chicks, little chickens, baby chicks. And she was putting them outside, and they were by the fence there, and she was afraid they were going to get cold last night, so she put a little heating lamp, and it shorted. Obviously, it shorted out. Caused this awful fire. So I'm trying to feel bad for my house and my fence, and now he's got me feeling bad for 7 little chicks. And I want to tell you that every chick was saved. I really do. I'd like to tell you that, but it didn't happen. And so it was really quite sad. And so we just kind of had a little memorial for the chicks, and Josh and I rebuilt that fence and got it all fixed. And I thought back to the fact that even though that was small at the moment, it was making progress towards the porch, and it would have caught the whole house on fire. And I thought about the day that we're living in right now. Thought about the times that we're living in right now. And on some level, I have to believe that America is on fire. There is a fire that has started in this country, and especially over the last, I would say, 10 years. As Pastor Stephen bravely tackles the subject of politics next Sunday morning, we've never been more divided. It's never been more hostile. I don't think, at least in my generation, in my lifetime in America as it is right now. There's a really deep division in our country. And there's also, beyond the political divide, there's gender divide, there's racial divide. And there's, a lot of economic peril as well. For those of us that live in reasonable prosperity and able to pay our bills and so on, which, would be probably more of us than not, there are a lot of people that can't and don't and are struggling with poverty, children who don't have enough food in the cupboard every week. And so with all of this going on, and even I would say, the mental health crisis in America, where right now, there's a lot of talk about guns in America, and I know I'm in Texas, so I'm not going to say anything that's going to get anyone mad. I love guns, all right? My dad had plenty of them. I grew up in Canada. We shot deers and elks and bears, and trust me, if you see a bear in Canada, it's good to have a gun. So in that respect, I'm a pro-gun guy. But you know what? The greatest danger in terms of a man today in America having a gun is killing himself, not somebody else. There are more men that die of suicide as a result of guns than homicide in America right now. And so we have all this stuff going on, and on some level, God wants to redeem this, and he wants to use his church. And some of you, let's move from national, talking about America, to personal. Some of you, some of us, have got a fire going on in our world. Maybe nobody even knows about it, but maybe you're in the middle of a divorce right now. It just feels like it's burning your life to the ground. Maybe you've just come through a divorce. Maybe you've got a betrayal of a friend in your life that has just left you and it's not been there for you. Maybe you have a son or daughter that has just gone off the rails and you don't know how they're going to make it, or maybe you've even lost a son or daughter. So many different things that can affect us and impact us in our culture today. And if you've ever felt like that, I just want you to know that you're not alone, that God has an answer for you. As we broach the subject of sexuality this morning, there's some of us that maybe that has impacted us in a very severe, maybe even a very private level, where you've had to navigate some pain and some trauma, some brokenness in that area. Maybe boundaries have been crossed in your life, or maybe you feel shame because of the boundaries you've crossed. Or maybe you've had just a hidden secret addiction and compulsion in this area that maybe you've never shared, and you just go to bed every night just feeling awful about this struggle that you have. Well, I can tell you I relate. Because 15 years ago, because of my decisions in terms of my own sexual behavior, 15 years ago, my life literally burned to the ground, friends. Everything about my life was gone. I say it like this, that, I'm not going to tell the whole story this morning, but I write in my book, Death by a Thousand Lies. I say it like this: by God's terrifying grace, all of my past was exposed. And it was grace because it had to, and it was God's grace that he gave me this opportunity to finally figure out how to get free from this. But it was terrifying in that because I just wouldn't confess and wouldn't seek help for so many years, that finally he had to pull back the curtain and say, I'm going to help you confess. I'm going to help to expose this for the good of yourself and your family. And I'd lived in this world, this awful world, for 23 years. It started in 1988 when I was 28 years old. Friends, I'd never looked at pornography in my life. It'd never been a thing for me. I grew up in the 70s. Anyone 70s kids, all right? Couple, yeah, right? So in the 70s, there was no access to pornography. I mean, here's the only way you'd see that kind of stuff in the 70s is if your dad had like one of those dirty magazines, in the drawer in his dresser or under his bed or something like that. And a few of my friends had fathers that they found, but my dad didn't, and I know because I looked everywhere. My dad was clean. And so I never looked at it. Never had access to it. So I go all the way through my teen years, all the way through my 20s. I'm 28, and I'm in a hotel room. I'm alone. I'm exhausted from just a weekend of speaking and counseling and doing all kinds of stuff. And I had made some really horrible spiritual, emotional health decisions in my life for the last several years. I had no rest in my life, no Sabbath. I was gone every weekend, away from my wife and my family a lot, and I'd made bad decisions in the name of preaching the gospel, in the name of working hard, and frankly, a lot of it out of my own ego to chase success. And so I'm sitting on the end of a bed, exhausted one night, and I see this white box on top of the television with a red button. And I knew what it was. I'd seen a lot of white boxes in a lot of hotel rooms. I knew what it was. I didn't know what it would look like. And I'd resisted the temptation to hit that red button 100 times. But at 28, in this moment, on that night, for whatever reason, it was like my resistance was futile. And I just got up and I hit that, and on came all these images. And I felt a dual competing emotion of incredible shame that I was viewing this, but also this exhilaration of, wow, never seen anything like this. And after about 10 minutes, I shut it off, and I made, on that evening and in my life, the worst decision that I've ever made in that moment. And the decision I made was to go down to the front desk, catch the attention of the clerk, and say, I want to pay for the movie that I just watched. Why did I want to pay for the movie? Because I didn't want my host church, who was paying for the room, to see that on the bill. And it was the beginning, friends, of what I would not have expected would be a 23-year cover-up of a secret, shameful sin that I could not quit. I could not stop. And like lust does in so many areas of our life, it never gets satisfied. It never plateaus. Lust will take you somewhere, and then it'll say, I want more. And then it'll take you there to say, no, I want more. How many know you can't open a bag of Oreo cookies and you can't eat one, right? You taste one and you want more. Then you've done a row, and then you're repenting and asking God to forgive you. So in 23 years, it moved from a pornography exploration to a habit to an addiction to a stronghold, until eventually, as I document pretty good detail in my book, how it destroyed my marriage, how I destroyed my marriage. And I began to act outside of my marriage. And when God graciously exposed it in 2009, I lost everything. And I might add, deservedly so. I resigned the church I was pastoring. I quit the ministry. I fully planned to just spend the rest of my life doing whatever, selling cars or whatever. It did plumbing. I don't know. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew that my life in doing any work for Jesus was over. And sadly, a year later, my marriage ended. My wife worked so hard to try to repair it, and so hard to try to salvage it. But she was so broken and so hurt, and there was such betrayal that she couldn't. And I understood that, and so did everyone else. And then I lost relationship with my 3 boys, who were all in their 20s at the time. They wanted nothing to do with me. I had become such a hypocrite in their minds, and I'd so betrayed them as a father that I lost for years relationship with my boys. And then there was financial devastation. House goes into foreclosure because can't pay the bills, and it just got worse and worse, until finally I made a really vain, stupid attempt to take my life. After sharing my confession with my own parents and seeing the incredible disappointment in their eyes, I walked out the back door, opened the back fence gate, walked to one of the busiest areas of traffic in Frisco, Texas, Legacy Drive, and I just started walking down Legacy Drive towards traffic, hoping something would hit me. Just walking towards trucks and cars and semis, and they're squealing and out of the way. And somebody very early on saw me and called 911, and within about 2 minutes, there were about 5 police cruisers that had just, come up and surrounded me, and a couple of cops got out, and they had their guns pulled, and they told me to get on the ground, which I did. They handcuffed me, and they figured out what was going on. They took me back to my house, and the next day I was sent on an airplane to Phoenix, Arizona, and I was in a rehab for 30 days. Full-time, 7-day-a-week rehab. And I would stay each night at the Dream Center, which was an outreach that was provided by a pastor at that time named Tommy Barnett, and his son now leads that ministry. But I stayed at the Dream Center every night with a bunch of other men and women that were struggling with their own addictions and brokenness. And so I remember one night, about halfway through this rehab, I went to my 3rd floor little space and room I was sleeping in, and I looked out the window, and I saw this red kind of sun kind of going down on the day, and it just lit up the sky with red. And the Lord reminded me that I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and He reminded me of the imagery and the I guess the story of the phoenix. And there was this idea in the story of the phoenix that when ashes and when something had been burned to the ground, that 500 years later, this phoenix would arise and there'd be life again. It was a secular story. But the Lord just gave me a glimpse of hope that night and said, Blaine, I am the one that can bring beauty for ashes. that even in your worst moment, even in your worst day, even though you don't deserve it, I have this ability to bring beauty for the ashes that you've created in your life. And this morning, I want to tell you that there was nothing more important in understanding that and how that would happen than understanding this issue of identity. Who are we really? So I'm just going to read one passage, and I'm going to give you 3 thoughts on identity this morning that can absolutely change everything if you have a struggle going on in any area of your life, no matter what it is. So there's this story of Jesus is at Galilee, and he gets up one morning and he tells his 12 disciples, he says, hey, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to Caesarea Philippi. And so they're like, really? Because Caesarea Philippi in that day was a long ways away from Galilee, 26 miles. It was the opposite way of Jerusalem, and it was a place that the rabbis forbade Jewish people to go to because it was so evil. It was so awful. Caesarea Philippi was known for this rock area. It wasn't a city, it was a region, and there was this rock area that people would gather at, and as they gather, they would worship all of these false gods, and they'd participate in music, and then this unbelievable display of immorality, and this would go on for hours, sometimes days. And the immorality that would happen and the sexual deviancy that would happen was unbelievable. I can't even repeat some of the things that would happen. And so Jesus says, we're going there. We're going there. This would be like, Pastor Stephen, calling together the preschoolers of the church and saying, hey, we're going to go to Vegas for the weekend. Kind of like that, because these disciples were, most of them teenagers, very, very young. And so I'm sure they're walking to Caesarea Philippi, and they're like, man, I don't know why we're going here. If my mom finds out, I am so busted, this is not good. But he gets there, and when he gets there, he doesn't do a crusade. He doesn't heal anyone. He doesn't teach people on a mountainside. He doesn't even cast out any devils. All he does is ask a question, and then they go back. Can you imagine your boss or your leader taking you 26 miles just to ask you a question and then return? And you have to believe that there was a reason why he wanted the context of Caesarea Philippi when he asked the question. And so here's the question. It says, Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? So he gets there and says, who do people say that I am? A question of identity. And they said, well, let's talk about it. Some say you're John the Baptist, others Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And he said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, look at this identity change. I tell you that you are now no longer Simon. He says, you are Peter, which means rock. So he's at this face of this rock. He's at this Caesarea Philippi, and he changes Simon's name to rock, to Peter. And he says, and on this rock, which meant bigger rock, that second word rock is a bigger rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. 3 different new identities that he provides in this moment. And when I read this, the Lord gradually began to speak to me and said, Blaine, if you can figure out these 3 revelations on identity, it will change your life. Change your life. Now, let me give you quick context. Got a couple pictures I want to show you here of Caesarea Philippi. This is the face of the rock that you're at Caesarea Philippi when you see it. It's 100 feet high, 500 feet wide, huge rock face. They have tours. If you go to Jerusalem or Israel, you can take a tour. You can see this. There's signs, tour guides. It's all documented. So there's that rock, and then as you go down the rock, you'll see the second picture here, and you'll see these little niches that are carved out in the rock. And these niches are places that the people of that day would put their gods, some kind of image to a deity, and these were the gods that they would worship as they came to the base of this rock for these festivals, really orgies. And then you go to the next slide, the last one, and you see the base of the rock, and you see this cave. And the people of that day believed that as they worshiped these false gods, as they gave and sacrificed, so to speak, their lives and their sexuality to these gods, that there were demon spirits or satanic spirits or evil spirits that would come in and out of that cave and possess them. That's what they believed. And so it was crazy. And here is where Jesus says, here is where he says, I will build my church upon this rock, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And of course, those of us that have, studied theology, maybe been raised in the church, we would know first and foremost that when he said, I'm going to build my church on a rock, that he was speaking first and foremost of the rock of revelation, that Jesus is the Son of God, that the church is built on that revelation and that understanding. But there is a secondary level to that statement that you can't not see Jesus standing on a rock with 12 disciples and saying, I'm going to build my church on this rock and the gates of hell won't prevail. What he was saying was, in this culture, in this place, in places like this all over the world, the church will prevail. That we don't have to be dominated by the sinfulness and the brokenness and the painfulness of the culture that we live in, no matter how on fire it is. That Christ is greater, that the church together is more powerful. So the Lord said, here's 3 things, Blaine, you've got to have a revelation of, and I'm going to do this in about 5 minutes. Number 1, he said you have to have a revelation of Christ as the Son of God. A new revelation of who Jesus really is. Can I tell you this morning about the beauty of Jesus? Can I tell you that he's more than just a religious figure, more than just somebody we kind of talk about? That Jesus, for 30 years, was in the shadows. Born, very celebrated in the beginning on his birth, but for 30 years, like this guy was underperforming. 30 years, it's like, I thought he was the Messiah. He was just, building stuff out of wood with his dad, didn't do anything for 30 years. No record of anything. He wasn't doing miracles in the classroom and, just kind of being a kid and then being a young man. And finally, he began his ministry at 30. And in 3 years, he changed the world. Revolutionized the world. His message was so powerful and it was so threatening to the elite, both the political elite and the religious elite, and so embraced by the common man, and so embraced by the hurting and the broken, that the religious elite were afraid of him, the political elite were threatened by him, and they all conspired to put him to death for no reason at all, and they did. We all know that Jesus went to the cross that Good Friday. So here's a man, lived really in the public eye for 3 years, never wrote a book, lots of books written about him, never wrote a book, never had an office, never built a building or a headquarters, never really traveled more than a few hundred miles from home, never engaged in political statecraft, but changed the world. And Caesar and Rome, the powers of the Jewish elite thought, well, finally, we've stopped this man and his message and his movement. We've snuffed it out. He is gone. He's in the grave. We're done. And of course, Jesus had other plans, and so did the Father. And 3 days later, this man rose from the dead and appeared to more than 500 people, and then he went to be with the Father. And now, a couple thousand years later, Jesus is still King of Kings. Jesus is still moving all over the world. There are more followers of Jesus than any other religion, any other person in the world. And he really only spread his message for 3 years. So Jesus is king, and Caesar, well, Caesar's a $5 pizza today. So that's what we have to say about Caesar. And I want you to know that revelation of Jesus so transformed my life. It moved him from a religious figure to king of my life and to embracing his goodness and his kingdom. And then the second thing is Jesus said, I want you to wake up to who you are. Do you know Jesus wants to rename every single one of us? Just like he did Peter. He said, you're moving from Simon, which is kind of curious one, questioner, to Peter, you're going to be a rock. And little did Peter know that the Lord, through the Holy Spirit, would use him to be the leader of the early church, to announce the early church, to bring the first harvest in, that first Pentecost Sunday where thousands got saved, that Peter had no idea, but he would be a rock that God would use. You see, we have to rediscover who we are. The world has named us. Our family has named us. Culture has named us. People have named us. And in many cases, they have named us wrong. We are not losers. We are not lazy. We are not poor. We are not broken people or broken toys. We are not addicts. We are not failures. We've heard those names growing up all of our life, and those names begin to impact us. We begin to believe what we've heard until suddenly we start actually acting like the names we've heard and been called. And I remember driving one day to one of my 12-step groups. I had 4. I checked in first 2 years, every single one of those 4 every week, and we'd get in a circle, as you've seen in maybe, films and movies, 12-step groups, or maybe you've been in one. We'd get in a circle with these, 10 to 12 guys. We'd all go around the circle and we'd check in. And we'd say something like, hey, my name is Jim and I'm an alcoholic, or my name is Bill, I'm a drug addict. And my check-in every week was, my name is Blaine and I'm a sex addict. I would say that week after week after week after week, and I'm driving, and the Holy Spirit just moves upon me in my car on my way that night and said, do not ever check in like that again, because that's not who you are. And he told me exactly how to check in. So I get there in the room, and if you've ever been in a 12-step group, you don't break code. Code is everything. And so I'm a little bit fearful. And I'm seeing my lead counselor and the other guys, and it finally gets to me. And I said, guys, with respect and love for all of you, here's my check-in. My name is Blaine, and I am a beloved son of the Father who is overcoming his brokenness and his addiction in the past by the grace of God and with good men like you. And there's this great big black guy sitting beside me. We'd become buddies. And he was a nurse. He always came in his nurse outfit after his shift at 6:30. And when I got done, he just looked over at me, and I thought he was going to kill me. But he looked over at me and he just went. Started looking at the other guys. The other guys were like, yeah. And the counselor said, Blaine, that was good. I like that. That moment changed my life. Because we will live into who we think we are. See, for years, while I was living in that world, I thought I was a shameful, ugly man. I would look in the mirror, hiding my secrets, and just look in the mirror and say, I hate you. I hate what you've become. And God redeemed my identity. And as I began to live into sonship and live into a Father that loved me, it began to change who I was and how I lived. And by God's grace and by his good community, I've been completely free without any relapse for over 13 and a half years. That is all God's grace, all God's grace. I hope this is for him and not me. That's the power of reclaiming our identity in Jesus. And then finally, God had to wake me up to the church. And he gave me this revelation. He said, Blaine, this church that will not prevail, or that will prevail against the world and the culture, do you know what that church is? Do you know what the definition of that church is? And I said, well, of course I do. 501c3 with a building, right? If we can just get another building up somewhere, if we can just, create another nonprofit, and, that we'll have the church covered. And, of course, we all know that's not true. And he began to take me back to that word church, because he just sprung it on his disciples. They'd never heard the word before. First time in the New Testament the word is used. And the word is ecclesia. And it simply means God's called out ones that are gathered together on mission. He said, Blaine, if you will dive deeply, meaningfully, consistently into the God called out ones in your community, and if you will be honest and transparent and not just kind of show up and leave, but dig deep into community in local church, and you say, well, didn't you do that? You were a pastor for years. Absolutely not. I'd get up and preach once a week, and then I'd leave. I didn't dig into relationships. I didn't have any brotherhood. I didn't have good, godly men in my life that I could be transparent and honest with. I feared ever sharing my own sins or my own secrets. And the Lord just said, I want you to dig in. And so today, I've got those deep and meaningful relationships and found purpose in the local church. Right now, I'm walking 50 men with me, with some other leadership at our home church in Tulsa through 8 weeks of freedom, 8 weeks of doing a journey to sexual purity. I've done that in my home church now for the last 5 years. We've brought over 350 men just in that church into a freedom and a setting free of past sins, where these guys finally felt like they could be in a place where it was safe and they could be honest and God could begin to deliver them. And I love it. And it's good for me to be in that kind of community. So I just want you to know that if you're new to this church, those of you that have been here, you know this. But I just want you to know that Seven City, this is the real deal. This is a place where you can really get help. This is a place where you are truly loved. This is a place where you can bring your honest secrets in and you won't be judged, you won't be kicked out, you won't be denied access at the door, because this is a place where Jesus and his church is prevailing over the culture. Amen? So welcome to freedom. Welcome to life. Welcome to love. Welcome to the kingdom of God. What a beautiful story. So embrace who Jesus really is. Embrace who you are. Allow Jesus to rename you as a beautiful, beloved son or daughter of the Father, and then embrace this beautiful, beautiful thing called the church. Let's pray. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this message. If you'd like to learn more about Seven City Church, you can visit sevencitychurch.com. Or if you're in the Fort Worth area, we'd love to invite you to our Sunday service. God bless you and have a great day.